Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Connie and I'm a furniture painter. This week I am painting a side table and I'm using a transfer from Dixie Belle paint, brand new transfer design, and that's why I've got the camera up here. My dog's just walking past, making as much noise as possible, and the table is right here. A little bit different to what I'd normally do, but I've still really enjoyed it and I hope you like the video. So here's the little table, here's how it started out. This was £10 from a charity shop and I really like the shape of it. It's not an old piece, it's factory finished in a paint, in a sort of a cream paint, which is a very slick surface. So I'm going to be using Slick Stick as a primer, but before I do that, I've got to clean. Where have I gone? There I go, I'm back again. I'm going to clean with Dixie Belle's White Lightning and then rinse the table all over. I'm also going to give it a scuff sand because when I ran my hand over it, I can feel some imperfections on the surface. So I'm just going to smooth all of those out. And I also made a little repair on the leg, which had a big kind of chip out of it. I did that with Dixie mud in white, let that dry and sanded that down. And now I'm going to apply Slick Stick. So the reason that you can see me talking is because I am currently filming a live video, which I have chopped into this one to edit into my YouTube video. So the product that I'm using is Slick Stick. I'm just telling people that I use a squeezy bottle to decant my Slick Stick into, which stops me getting sort of a crusty lid on my Slick Stick tub. So I just decant some Slick Stick onto a paper plate and use a synthetic brush to apply my Slick Stick. That way you get a perfectly smooth finish. If you use a natural bristle brush, you're obviously going to get a little bit more texture and brush strokes. I use a synthetic brush. They're absolutely fine to use with both the primers in the Dixie Belle range, as long as you wash them out straight away. Don't let the primer dry on there. Because that is when you'll have problems, and just basically apply the Slick Stick all over the piece. Slick Stick is a primer that allows you to paint pieces that ordinarily are too slippy for paint to grip onto. So factory finishes like this one, glass, metal, plastic, laminate, those kinds of things. I'm using a slightly smaller brush just to get in those smaller areas, and then I'll use the larger brush for the flatter surfaces like the top. So you need to apply one coat of Slick Stick and allow that to dry for a couple of hours. Then a second coat of Slick Stick you need to allow to dry for 24 hours before you can start painting. So I've applied a couple of layers here. Apologies if you can hear any background noise. I think somebody's just fired a jackhammer up in one of the gardens, one of my neighbours. So apologies if you can hear any background noise on my voiceover today. So I applied 2 coats of Slick Stick, let that dry overnight, and now I can go in with my paint. I'm using a Bestang brush, which is a natural bristle brush. I'm also using the colour Vintage Duck Egg, and I've got a tiny bit of sea spray in here because the table does have some imperfections, and sea spray just gives you a little bit more kind of a thicker consistency to your paint. So it's a texture additive, it comes in powder form. The more you add into your paint, the thicker your paint consistency and the more texture your paint will hold. Next colour I'm going to add is Cobalt Blue. I'm using a synthetic brush and I'm applying this while the Vintage Duck Egg is still wet. So I'm tapping it into the Vintage Duck Egg, almost getting them to blend together, but I do want a little bit of tonal range. I don't want this to be one flat colour. The next colour that I'm going to use is Bunker Hill Blue, and I'm going to again stipple that into that lighter blue colour above it, which was a mix of Vintage Duck Egg and Cobalt. I'll list all the colours and products used in the description below, as I always do. And again, I'm just sort of tapping it into the surface because I do want a little bit of kind of texture to this. I don't want it to be perfectly smooth. I want it to look a little bit like water. I'm using a synthetic brush. This is going to give me that kind of softness to it, and it's yeah, just basically tapping it in until I get the colours to kind of melt together. The colour that I'm using right at the very bottom on its little dinky feet is in the navy. So if you struggle with blending colours, or if you are a little bit scared of putting some colours together to blend, if you choose colours that are very close to one another, it's much easier to blend than colours that are completely opposite. For example, two blues, i.e. the blues that I'm blending together here in the navy and Bunker Hill blue, it's a lot easier to blend those colours together than if you were to pick a pink and a green and try and blend those. It can still be done, but if you're starting out or if you're a little bit daunted, stick to colours that are close to one another. So I let that completely dry down, and then I went in with a second coat of basically the same thing. I'm using a combination of all different kinds of brushes here. This particular one is Best Dang brush, which is a natural bristle brush, and it just gives you a little bit more texture versus a synthetic brush. But I do use a combination of all different types of brushes here. It's just basically because that's how I work. There is no rhyme or reason. This one is a Belle brush, I think, that I'm using now. And basically all you're going to do is create a little bit more texture and brush strokes with a natural bristle brush versus a synthetic brush, which is going to give you a more smoother finish. So the second coat is just going to build up coverage, make sure I've covered all of that slick stick up and there's no kind of areas where there's any of that white primer showing through. I'm just introducing a little bit of cobalt blue to the very bottom of the lip of the table and around the bottom of the drawer, just to emphasise that pretty kind of curve design around the bottom there. And yeah, just playing around with making sure it's kind of all melted together and there's no sort of harsh lines or anything like that in the paint. And to keep the paint kind of open and make sure that all the colours blend together, I am using a tiny little spritz of water, although not too much, and I'm pretty sure I didn't capture that on camera, but I am using a little spritz of water here and there just to get the colours to melt together and to ensure that I can blend them without the paint drying down too quickly. This is just a little close-up of the leg just to show you how well the colours kind of melt together. Chalk mineral paint from Dixie Belle blends together beautifully, no matter what your technique, whether you stipple it like I am, or whether you kind of want that perfectly blended finish or a little bit more of a bohemian finish. It blends really, really well together. And this colour palette that I've chosen obviously is going to be a lot easier to blend together because it's just going from a light blue to a dark blue. So I'm just kind of playing around with it and making sure that I've got a nice kind of ombre look. So ombre's done, happy with that. Now on to the fun part. I'm using a brand new transfer design from Dixie Belle Paint. It's called Balance, and it's a series of koi fish and lily pads and flowers. So I have just chopped out a centerpiece, and then I'm going to kind of make an organic kind of shape with the fish and separate lily pads. So it's a really versatile transfer. You can make your own design with it, and it has lots of separate elements that you can chop out and lay over each other to make something completely unique. So to apply a transfer, it's very easy. All you do is place the transfer down, use the rubbing tool that comes in the tube, and you are basically transferring that image onto that off that plastic sheet onto your painted or wooden or plastic or metal surface. And it's super easy. All you do is gently pull up the plastic, and as you pull, rub it down, and your image will be on your tabletop or wherever you are putting your image. So once that centerpiece was down, I'm then going to start building the transfer with some of the separate elements. So I cut some fish out, some individual fish, and I'm going to kind of make a sort of like an organic kind of flowing design over the top of the table. This transfer has got 4 sheets. I don't know if I've already said that. I'll say it again. It's got 4 sheets of the design. Some pieces are like the centerpiece, which are kind of intertwined, and then there's some separate elements as well, like the individual fish and individual flowers. So I'm just placing that down to get the kind of design that I want, very organic and flowy. And I don't want to pack the table too much. I do want some sort of free space, so I'm just making sure that it's where I want it before I start rubbing the transfer. Let's fast forward a little bit. You get the idea. So I've kind of placed it almost diagonally, going top left to bottom right, in a very kind of organic kind of placement. I'm using clear coat satin, and I'm going to seal this transfer because I do plan to introduce a little bit of paint over the top. So if you do plan on painting a transfer, or even if you don't plan on using paint over a transfer, you still have to seal your transfer. You can use any of the Dixie Belle clear coats to seal. You can also use Easy Peasy spray wax and Best Dang wax, but it's best to avoid products that are oil based, such as hemp oil or Big Mama's butter. I allowed my clear coat to dry for a couple of hours, and I'm using the Belle brush with a very small amount of paint. I'm actually using a little bit of paint off the lid of the tub. This colour is Vintage Duck Egg, which is one of the colours that I've used on the top, and all I'm going to do is just introduce a little bit of paint kind of in between the fish, and I'm going to add a little bit of depth using Vintage Duck Egg and Cobalt. And also, can you see where some of my fish are kind of peeking into the table, so there's not a full fish's body where it's kind of chopped off. I'm just introducing a little bit of paint over there so that it doesn't look like a straight line where the fish has kind of body's been chopped off. It looks a little bit more organic. It looks a little bit like the edge of a pond, or that's what I'm hoping it looks like anyway. And then, before the Vintage Duck Egg has had a chance to dry, I am using an artist brush with Cobalt Blue. And this is just going to add a little bit of depth and also emphasise the fish. So I'm just going around, almost outlining some of the fish, but I am using water to water it down. I don't want a solid line, and it's just going to create a little bit more depth, because obviously water isn't one dimensional, it's not one colour. So I'm just going to kind of introduce this deeper blue to basically try and make it look a little bit more realistic. Okay, so I've zoomed in a little bit on what I'm doing. So you can see I'm using one of Dixie Belle's artist brushes, and I'm just adding a tiny bit of Cobalt Blue, and this colour is a very strong pigmented colour, so I didn't use a lot at all. And I'm just adding a spritz of water, and this is why it's so important to seal your transfer if you are going to do anything like this, because if moisture gets underneath your transfer, it can start to lift. So you must make sure your paint is dry, you must make sure that you've sealed it before you start to do anything like this over the top. So I'm just kind of almost blending it out a little bit like a watercolour effect over the kind of duck egg blue, just to get a little bit of shading around the fish, which is basically going to highlight the fish and make it more three-dimensional. So I chopped a lot of that out because it was a bit slow going, obviously with an artist brush and kind of blending it out. But I'm hoping you can tell that subtle bit of difference by adding that cobalt blue. And then again, I went over with satin clear coat to seal it, and also that's going to protect the tabletop, and just seal in those extra little bits of detail that I've just added with the paint. At this stage I was happy with the top, so I sealed the rest of the table as well. I did have a little helper tidying up for me because I wanted to get this thing staged, and this was the day that I really hurt my knee. And usually I sit on the floor, as you know, and I just couldn't because my knee was in such bad pain. So I got my little helper to do the inside of the legs under my direction, and she also learnt how to apply a top coat, and she did a cracking job. So you can just see my daughter Nancy just popping in the video right at the end, and she just, like I say, helped me get those legs at the very bottom because I didn't want to turn it upside down and risk obviously marking the top. So she got down for me and just applied that satin clear coat over the legs. And this one was actually really hard to stage because I wanted to show you the base of the table with the ombre, which is there, but the main attraction is obviously that gorgeous transfer on the top. So I've tried to do a couple of close-ups of each for you so you can see it. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you liked it and I hope you like the transfer. Catch you next time, and make sure you are subscribed to my channel.